I have news for you. Tidings of immense significance. Pause, if you will, draw a deep breath, and allow the profound weight of what I am about to impart to settle into the very core of your being. Today, this day that you may have unwittingly cast aside as merely mundane, a day that felt like just another tedious chapter in an unending saga of struggles. You accomplished something extraordinary, something that resonated with the heavens themselves. Perhaps you are unaware. It's unlikely you witnessed a choir of angels or heard the joyous fanfare of celestial trumpets. Yet, I implore you to comprehend, with unwavering clarity, your actions today stirred the heart of the divine in ways that unleashed ripples throughout the spiritual tapestry. And in this very moment, God gazes upon you with unadulterated delight. I sense your skepticism, the doubt that clings to you like a shadow. You're replaying in your mind's eye all that you didn't accomplish, the abbreviated prayer, the fleeting loss of temper with that difficult person, the tendrils of doubt that crept in when circumstances remained unchanged, the moment of weakness when the temptation to surrender loomed large. You're meticulously cataloging your perceived failures, your shortcomings, your imperfections, and you struggle to fathom how anything you did today could possibly elicit joy from the creator of the cosmos. But therein lies the crux of the matter. You are measuring your day against flawed human standards, against rigid religious checklists, against unrealistic expectations of perfection that God Himself never imposed. You are assessing your worth based on your performance, instead of understanding the lens through which God truly views you. Oh, chosen one, there exists a chasm of epic proportions between how you perceive your day and how the heavens experienced it. Allow me to unveil the truth, to draw back the curtain and reveal the events that the spiritual realm bore witness to. For when you perceive yourself through the eyes of eternity, when you truly grasp what moves God's heart, everything transforms. Your entire perspective is recalibrated. The burden of shame is lifted. The shackles of condemnation shatter, and you finally understand why you were chosen in the first place. This morning, you awoke. I realize it sounds deceptively simple, almost comical to mention, but I urge you to pause and contemplate the profound significance of that act within the spiritual realm. You awoke in a world actively hostile to those of faith. You opened your eyes in a culture that openly mocks your beliefs, derides your values, and relentlessly pressures you to compromise your very essence. You awoke carrying burdens that would cripple lesser spirits, crushing financial anxieties, tangled relationship woes, gnawing health concerns, the heavy weight of unmet expectations, the agonizing sting of promises long delayed. You awoke weary, perhaps even disillusioned, possibly questioning the very foundations of your spiritual journey. And yet, you rose anyway. Do you comprehend the magnitude of what that communicated to the heavens when you chose to emerge from slumber, despite the bone-deep exhaustion, despite the crushing disappointment, despite every logical rationale, to remain submerged beneath the covers, shielded from another day of relentless trials? That was an act of profound worship. It was a resounding declaration of unwavering faith. It was you proclaiming, "I may not fully comprehend your plan, God, but I am still choosing to show up. I may not discern how this will ultimately work out, but I am still choosing to participate. I may not feel your tangible presence, but I am still choosing to believe in your reality." Heaven took notice. Angels stood in silent reverence, and God Himself smiled upon you. You see, God is not seeking perfection. He is moved by perseverance. He is not impressed by your flawless facade. He is touched by your willingness to keep moving forward, even when everything around you seems to be crumbling. The religious systems of this world have conditioned you to believe that God is pleased by impeccable performance, by meticulously ticking off every spiritual box, by maintaining an unblemished record. But that is not the God revealed within the sacred texts. That is not the compassionate Father that Jesus unveiled to us. The God of the Bible is captivated by faith, and faith is not synonymous with certainty. It is unwavering trust in the face of profound uncertainty. Faith is not inherent strength. It is leaning upon God when your own strength has utterly failed. Faith is not possessing all the answers. It is resolutely following God even when nothing makes sense. And today, chosen one, you demonstrated that kind of faith in ways that you are likely completely oblivious to. Let me illuminate what heaven witnessed today that escaped your notice. You experienced a moment this morning, perhaps while showering, perhaps during your daily commute, perhaps while brewing your morning coffee, when despair attempted to convince you that nothing would ever change. An insidious voice whispered lies about your future, replaying your past failures, magnifying your present circumstances, suggesting that all your believing, all your trusting, all your hoping was nothing more than naive optimism destined to be brutally crushed when reality inevitably exposed God as someone other than who you believed Him to be. And for a fleeting moment, you listened to that voice. You felt the suffocating weight of its words. You teetered precariously on the brink of giving up, of walking away, of resigning yourself to the notion that faith was simply not meant for you. But then, and this is the moment when heaven held its collective breath, you made a choice. It was not dramatic, not accompanied by a surge of adrenaline or a sudden burst of divine revelation. It was quiet, subtle, almost imperceptible. You simply resolved, "No, I will not succumb to this darkness today. I refuse to align myself with this lie. I may not feel God, but I am choosing to believe He is real nonetheless. I may not see the breakthrough, but I am declaring that it is coming. I may not understand the delay, but I am trusting that it serves a divine purpose." That moment, that seemingly insignificant decision to resist the allure of despair, that courageous choice to take another step forward in faith when every fiber of your being screamed to quit, that split-second determination to believe in God despite overwhelming contradictory evidence. It ignited a celestial celebration. Angels rejoiced, demons scattered in terror, and God looked upon you with the profound delight that a father feels when his child takes their first tentative wobbly steps, not because the steps are flawless, but because the child trusts enough to try despite the inherent risk of falling. You believe God requires your perfection, but He created perfection. He sculpted galaxies, orchestrated breathtaking sunsets, and designed ecosystems of unfathomable complexity. Your flawless performance adds nothing to His glory, but your unwavering trust when you have every earthly reason not to trust, your steadfast faith when doubt is screaming in your ear, your resolute decision to continue believing when circumstances make belief appear foolish, that moves him, that delights him. That is what he seeks. And you did that today, multiple times. In fact, though you may not have been keeping count, there was that difficult conversation you had, the one where someone made a comment that triggered you, that pushed every single button you possessed, a comment that in the past would have instantly propelled you into a reaction you would later deeply regret. You felt the heat of anger rising within you. You felt the overwhelming urge to defend yourself, to lash out in retaliation, to put that person firmly in their place. Old patterns began to resurface. Familiar responses began to formulate within your mind. But you didn't go there. You paused. You breathed. You chose a different path. Perhaps you walked away. Perhaps you extended grace instead of condemnation. Perhaps you simply refused to engage in the escalating drama. It wasn't easy. It cost you something internally. You had to crucify your ego, swallow your pride, relinquish your perceived right to be right. Heaven observed that God saw you actively choosing His way over your own. He saw you prioritizing peace over the fleeting satisfaction of proving yourself correct. He saw you embodying the very character of Christ in a moment when your flesh yearned to demonstrate something entirely different. And He was delighted, not because you merely performed a religious obligation, but because you are genuinely becoming the person He created you to be. You are transforming. You are growing. You are allowing His divine nature to supplant your old, flawed nature. And nothing brings a father greater joy than witnessing the maturation of his child. And then there was that moment of unexpected generosity. Perhaps it was financial, giving even when your own needs remained unmet. Perhaps it was the gift of your time, helping someone even though your schedule was already overflowing. Perhaps it was emotional, offering encouragement to someone who was struggling, even though you yourself were barely holding it together. Whatever form it took, you gave from a place of perceived lack. You poured out when your own cup felt desperately empty. You blessed someone else when you were the one in desperate need of a blessing. That singular act of generosity, that courageous decision to be a conduit of blessing rather than a hoarder of resources, that unwavering choice to trust in God's provision, enough to release what you held dear, it created a tangible shift within the spiritual realm. Because generosity is the very language of the kingdom. It is how heaven operates. And when you chose to give rather than grip, to release rather than retain, to trust in God's boundless supply rather than depend solely on your own limited resources, you aligned yourself with heaven's economy. You demonstrated that you understood how the kingdom truly functions. You proved yourself ready for greater responsibilities because you had proven yourself trustworthy with what you already possessed. God saw it, and He smiled, not simply because you helped another, but because you were actively operating as a citizen of His kingdom. You were living according to different principles than the fear-based, scarcity-minded world that surrounds you. You are functioning as someone who genuinely believes that God is faithful, that His supply is unlimited, that you could afford to be generous because you were connected to an inexhaustible source. Let me tell you about another moment from today that ignited celestial celebration, the moment you chose to worship when you felt absolutely nothing. Perhaps it was listening to worship music. Perhaps it was a prayer you forced yourself to utter when your heart felt distant and disconnected. Perhaps it was simply choosing gratitude when complaining would have been easier and more natural given your challenging circumstances. You didn't feel particularly spiritual. You didn't experience some transcendent encounter. You weren't moved by overwhelming emotion or elevated by fervent passion. You were simply going through the motions, doing what you knew you were supposed to do, even though it felt dry and mechanical and almost pointless. But here's what you missed. The most powerful worship occurs when you receive no emotional payoff. The most meaningful praise is offered when you don't feel God's tangible presence. The most significant prayers are the ones you grit your teeth and utter through tears of frustration, through a heart that is questioning whether anyone is even listening. Why? Because that kind of worship proves that it's not about you. It proves that you are not serving God merely for what you receive in return. It demonstrates that your faith is not contingent upon feeling good, experiencing His presence, or receiving immediate answers to your prayers. It shows that you love God for who He is, not just for what He does for you. And that is the kind of worship that heaven values most. The worship that costs you something, that requires you to sacrifice your own preferences for His glory, that chooses Him even when there is no immediate reward. Today, when you worshipped without feeling, when you praised despite your pain, when you chose gratitude in the midst of difficulty, you gave God something precious. You gave Him authentic worship, not the performative kind, not the I worship because I feel blessed kind, but the I worship because you are worthy, even when my life is hard kind. And that moved heaven in ways that perfect, emotion-filled worship never could. There is another thing you did today that you absolutely do not recognize as significant, but I assure you, it registered in heaven. You resisted temptation. Maybe it was a monumental temptation, something that has tripped you up repeatedly in the past. Maybe it was a smaller one, a compromising thought you refused to entertain, a toxic conversation you declined to participate in, a questionable shortcut you chose not to take, even though no one would have known. The specific details are not as important as the underlying decision, because in that moment, when temptation presented itself, when the easy path looked appealing, when compromise seemed justified, you resolutely said no. You chose obedience over convenience. You picked integrity over fleeting advantage. You valued God's approval more than temporary pleasure or relief. Do you know how rare that is? Do you understand how many people cave in at that exact moment? The enemy relentlessly throws temptation at everyone, but the chosen ones, the ones God can actually entrust with significant kingdom assignments, are those who have cultivated the discipline to say no to what is wrong, even when saying yes would be far easier. You are building character in the hidden places. You are cultivating strength when no one is watching. You are proving yourself trustworthy with small things so that God can entrust you with greater things. Heaven noticed. God saw your private victory. He witnessed your secret obedience, and He is delighted, not because you earned points on some cosmic scorecard, but because you are becoming the kind of person He can partner with. You are showing that you can be trusted in the small moments, which means you are ready for bigger moments. You are demonstrating integrity when it costs you something, which means you will maintain integrity when it costs you even more. Now, let me address what you are probably thinking right now. You are mentally reviewing your day and recalling all the moments that didn't resemble what I have just described: the time you lost your patience, the moment you indulged a negative thought, the hour you wasted on distractions instead of being productive, the conversation where you gossiped, the prayer you forgot to pray, the Bible you didn't open, the promise you broke to yourself, the commitment you failed to keep. You are sitting there thinking, but what about all of that? What about my failures? What about the things I did wrong today? How can God be delighted with me when I am so far from perfect? And this is where you need to hear me clearly. God is not delighted with your perfection, because you are not perfect and never will be in this life. God is delighted with your direction. He is not measuring your day by whether you got everything right. He is looking at the trajectory of your heart. He is observing the overall pattern of your choices. He is watching to see if, despite the inevitable failures and setbacks and imperfections, you are still moving toward Him rather than away from Him. Think about it this way. If you have a toddler learning to walk, you don't become enraged every time they stumble. You don't condemn them for falling. You don't disown them because they cannot immediately walk perfectly. You celebrate the effort. You delight in the progress. You encourage every wobbly step. You are thrilled that they are trying, that they are growing, that they are developing. The falls are part of the process. The stumbles are expected. What matters most is that they keep getting back up and trying again. That is how God sees you, not as a finished product that keeps malfunctioning, but as a beloved child who is learning, growing, developing. Your failures today do not erase your victories. Your stumbles do not negate your progress. Your imperfections do not disqualify you from His delight. You got back up today after falling. You tried again after failing. You kept believing after doubting. You chose faith after fear momentarily won. That is what moves God. That is what touches heaven. Not your perfection, but your persistence. Not your flawless performance, but your faithful pursuit of Him despite your imperfections. And here is something else you did today that heaven treasured. You stayed. You didn't quit. You didn't walk away. You didn't abandon your faith. You didn't give up on God. Despite every reason to throw in the towel, despite the unanswered prayers and unmet expectations and unchanged circumstances, despite the agonizing delays and heart-wrenching disappointments and overwhelming difficulties, you stayed. Do you know how significant that is? Do you understand that most people don't make it this far? Most people give up when the road gets too hard. Most people abandon their faith when prayers aren't answered quickly enough. Most people walk away when God doesn't perform according to their predetermined timeline. But you are still here, still believing, still trusting, still following, still showing up day after day after day. Even when you don't see the results you expected. That unwavering loyalty moves God. That steadfast faithfulness in the face of adversity touches His heart. That resolute determination to keep believing when circumstances scream. That belief is utterly foolish. It is what separates the chosen ones from everyone else. Anyone can believe when things are going well. Anyone can have faith when prayers are answered immediately. anyone can trust when life is comfortable, but you are believing when things are hard. You are having faith when answers are delayed. You are trusting when life is uncomfortable and confusing and complicated, and God sees that. Heaven recognizes that. Angels witness that kind of faith and marvel at it, because that is the faith that moves mountains. That is the faith that shifts spiritual atmospheres. That is the faith that qualifies you for the assignments and blessings and breakthroughs that are coming. You are building something in this season of difficulty that could not be built any other way. You are developing spiritual muscle that will be absolutely necessary for what God has planned for your future. So today, when you felt like you didn't accomplish anything significant, when you felt like you barely survived, when you felt like you were just treading water and making no progress, heaven saw something completely different. Heaven saw a warrior who refused to surrender. Heaven saw a believer who chose trust over doubt. Heaven saw a child of God who is becoming who they were created to be. God is not waiting for you to get it all together before He delights in you. He is not withholding His pleasure until you achieve some unattainable level of perfection. He delights in you right now, today, in the midst of your mess and your struggle and your imperfection, because He doesn't see you as you see yourself. He sees the finished product. He sees who you are becoming. He sees the divine purpose you are walking toward. And every step you take in His direction, every choice you make to trust Him, every moment you resist giving up, it all touches His heart. Today, you touched heaven. Not because you were perfect, but because you were faithful. Not because you had it all together, but because you kept going when everything was falling apart. Not because you felt spiritual, but because you chose obedience when it cost you something. And God is truly delighted with you. Let that truth sink in for a moment. God is delighted with you. Not disappointed, not frustrated, not waiting impatiently for you to finally get your act together. Delighted. The creator of the universe, the one who spoke galaxies into existence, the Ancient of Days who holds eternity in His hands. He looks at you today, and He is genuinely, authentically, deeply delighted. You need to understand the full weight of what that word means. Delight is not mere tolerance. It is not grudging acceptance. It is not a half-hearted, "I guess you're good enough for now." Delight is joy. It is pleasure. It is the kind of feeling a parent experiences when they watch their child take their first steps, speak their first words, or accomplish something they have been working so hard to achieve. It is celebration. It is pride, in the very best sense of the word. It is love expressing itself through genuine happiness at who you are and what you are becoming. And that is how God feels about you today. After everything you went through, after every moment you struggled, after every time you stumbled, after every instance where you felt like you failed Him, despite all of it, or perhaps because of how you responded to all of it, God is delighted. I know this is hard for you to accept. I can sense your resistance to this truth. Even now, you have been conditioned by rigid religious systems, by toxic teachings, by well-meaning but misguided voices, to believe that God's approval is something you must earn, that His delight is something you must achieve through perfect behavior, flawless faith, and constant spiritual victories. You have been taught that God is keeping score, that He is disappointed more often than He is pleased, that you are always one mistake away from losing His favor. But that is not the God that Jesus revealed. That is not the Father that Scripture describes. That is a distorted image created by broken theology and religious performance. The real God, the one who actually exists, the one who made you and knows you and loves you, He delights in you, not because you are perfect, but because you are His. Think about it this way. If you are a parent, do you only delight in your children when they are behaving perfectly? Do you only feel joy toward them when they are achieving, succeeding, making you proud? Or do you delight in them simply because they are yours? Don't you feel love and joy even when they are struggling, even when they are failing, even when they are making mistakes? Don't you look at them with tenderness and affection, even in their worst moments, because they belong to you, and you know who they truly are beneath the surface struggles? That is how God sees you. That is how He feels about you. Today, when you felt like you accomplished nothing of significance, when you felt like you barely made it through, when you felt like your faith was weak and your efforts were inadequate, He was watching you with the eyes of a Father who sees so much more than you see in yourself. He saw your heart. He saw your desire to please Him, even when you felt like you were falling short. He saw your longing to be closer to Him, even when you felt distant. He saw your hunger for more of Him, even when circumstances made you question everything. And all of that hunger, that longing, that desire, it moved Him, it touched Him, it delighted Him, because God is not looking for people who have it all figured out. He is not searching for those who never struggle, never doubt, never fail. He is looking for people who want Him, people who, despite their imperfections and weaknesses and failures, keep reaching for Him, keep turning toward Him, keep choosing Him over and over again, even when it would be so much easier to walk away. That is who you were today. That is what you demonstrated, and heaven noticed. You know what else delighted God today? Your honesty. There were moments today when you were brutally honest with Him about how you were really feeling. Maybe it was during prayer, when you stopped using religious jargon and just told Him the raw truth about your frustration, your confusion, your disappointment. Maybe it was in your journal, when you wrote words you would never say out loud. Maybe it was in your car, when you cried and questioned and wrestled with Him. Religious systems teach you to always be polite with God, to always use the right words, to always approach Him with a reverence that borders on fear. But God is not interested in your religious performance. He is interested in your real heart. He wants authenticity, not perfection. He craves genuine relationship, not rehearsed prayers. When you got real with God today, when you dropped the pretense and just told Him how you actually feel, that moved Him. That is the kind of relationship He has been longing for with you, not one where you are constantly performing, constantly monitoring your words, constantly trying to say all the right things, but one where you trust Him enough to be completely honest, where you are secure enough in His love to show Him your mess, where you believe deeply enough in His grace to admit your struggles without fear of rejection. David was called a man after God's own heart. Do you know what characterized David's relationship with God? Brutal honesty, Read the Psalms. David questioned God. He complained to God. He accused God of abandoning him. He wrestled with God. He brought his doubts, his fears, his anger, his confusion, all of it, directly to God without filtering it through religious language. And God loved it. God delighted in David, not because David was perfect, he absolutely was not, but because David's heart was fully engaged with God. David didn't hold back. He didn't pretend. He didn't perform. He just showed up as he was, brought everything he was feeling, and trusted that God was big enough to handle his honesty. That is what you did today, and it delighted God's heart. There's something else that happened today that you need to recognize. You showed kindness. Consider the moments today when you extended kindness to someone who arguably didn't deserve it. Perhaps it was an interaction with a particularly difficult person, someone who habitually tests your patience, or maybe it was someone who has caused you pain in the past, whose actions still sting. Perhaps it was simply a stranger displaying rudeness, a momentary blip in your day. In each of these instances, you had the opportunity to react in kind, to meet their negativity with negativity, to unleash your own form of harshness. Yet, you consciously chose a different path, kindness. That choice, that conscious decision to be gentle, wasn't weakness. It was profound strength. It wasn't being a doormat, allowing yourself to be walked upon. It was, in essence, reflecting the very nature of Christ, because extending kindness in the face of adversity, offering grace in response to harshness, choosing mercy when justice seems the easier, more satisfying route. That's the crucial distinction. That's what separates those who merely profess belief in God from those who genuinely embody His character. It's easy, almost instinctive, to be kind to those who are kind to us. It's natural to love those who love us in return. It's expected to show grace to those we deem deserving. But to extend kindness to someone who seems utterly undeserving, to offer grace to someone who has been consistently ungracious, to choose love when hate feels justifiable, that transcends the ordinary. That's divine. That's supernatural. That's tangible evidence that God's Spirit is not just present within you, but actively transforming you, molding you into the image of Jesus. And when you made that choice today, when you chose kindness over the tempting pull of retaliation, grace over the snap judgment, love over the slow burn of resentment, heaven itself celebrated. God witnessed His own nature being expressed through you, a tangible reflection of His character manifested in a practical, everyday way. And He was delighted, not because you earned points on some cosmic scorecard, not because you achieved a certain level of moral perfection, but because He saw irrefutable proof that His work within you is real, that true transformation is indeed happening, that you are day by day becoming the person He created you to be. Let me share another moment from today, another subtle act that deeply moved God's heart. At some point, you extended forgiveness. Perhaps it was a spoken forgiveness, directly addressing the person who wronged you. Perhaps it was a silent act of forgiveness, a quiet release within your heart. Perhaps, and perhaps most powerfully, you forgave yourself for something you've been holding against yourself, a past mistake that continues to haunt you. But somewhere within the confines of your day, you made a conscious choice to release someone from the debt they owed you, to absolve them of their transgression, Forgiveness is never easy. It always demands a sacrifice. It requires you to absorb the pain that someone else caused, rather than demanding they pay for it, exacting your pound of flesh. It demands that you willingly release your perceived right to justice, your insistent claim to vindication, your unwavering insistence that wrongs be made right before you can move forward. True forgiveness means choosing freedom over the suffocating grip of resentment, choosing to embrace your future rather than remaining tethered to your past, choosing the serenity of peace over the fleeting, ultimately empty satisfaction of holding a grudge. When you forgave today, whomever it was, whatever they did, you accomplished something truly remarkable. You literally shifted the spiritual atmosphere surrounding your life, because unforgiveness is like a heavy chain, binding you inextricably to the person who hurt you and to the specific moment when that hurt occurred. Each time you mentally rehearse the offense, each time you replay the betrayal in your mind, each time you nurture the bitterness that festers within you, you only strengthen those chains, tightening their hold. You keep yourself imprisoned in a past moment, rendering yourself unable to fully step into the future that awaits you. But when you forgive, you shatter those chains. You sever the cords that bind you to the pain of the past. You liberate yourself, enabling you to step fully into what God has prepared for you, the abundant life that awaits. And here is the profound, beautiful truth at the heart of it all. Forgiveness isn't primarily about the other person. It's fundamentally about you. It's about refusing to allow what someone did to you to dictate what God can do through you. God witnessed you forgive today. He saw you choosing freedom over the suffocating weight of bondage. He observed you demonstrating the very heart of the gospel, receiving grace and then extending that same grace to others. And he was profoundly moved by it, because forgiveness is the very language of heaven. It's the operating principle of the kingdom. It's irrefutable proof that you truly understand grace, that you have genuinely received it into your own life, and that you are mature enough to steward the greater things God desires to entrust to you. There's another moment from today that I need you to recognize, another subtle act of faith that resonated deeply within the heavens. You hoped when hope seemed utterly foolish. You know that thing you've been believing for, that long-awaited promise that feels like it's perpetually just out of reach, that cherished dream that seems to be slowly, painfully dying. Even if only for a fleeting moment, you chose to hope again. Maybe it was a brief flicker, a momentary spark in the darkness. Maybe doubt immediately rushed in to extinguish it, attempting to smother the flame before it could grow. But there was a moment when you dared to believe again, when you whispered a prayer you've uttered 1,000 times before, when you declared a promise you're increasingly tempted to believe will never come to fruition, when you clung to faith even though your external circumstances remain unchanged and nothing looks even remotely different than it did yesterday. That single moment of hope, that conscious decision to believe for just one more day, that deliberate choice to trust in God's word over the seemingly insurmountable weight of your current reality, it created a palpable shift in the spiritual realm. Hope isn't passive, wishful thinking. It's active spiritual warfare. Every time you choose to hope, You are actively declaring war on the enemy's insidious lies, pushing back against the encroaching darkness. Heaven saw you hope today. God Himself took note of it, and He was utterly delighted, not because your hope somehow obligates Him to perform on your specific timeline, not because He is somehow beholden to your expectations, but because your hope is living proof that His Spirit is alive within you, that His promises have taken root in the fertile ground of your heart. If you can feel in your spirit right now that God is truly delighted with you, type, "Thank you, Father," in the comments. Let your declaration be witnessed. Let heaven see your gratitude overflowing. Now, let me explain why all of this profoundly matters. When you truly grasp that God is pleased with you, not because of your elusive perfection, but because of the genuine posture of your heart toward Him, everything shifts. When you labor under the false belief that God is only pleased with perfection, you inevitably live in a state of constant anxiety. You're perpetually striving, constantly performing, and always living in fear of falling short. Your relationship with Him becomes driven by fear rather than by love. But when you understand that God delights in you as His beloved child, that His love isn't conditional but unwavering and constant, you are finally freed to truly grow. You can be honest about your struggles, acknowledging your weaknesses without shame. You can rest in the boundless grace He offers instead of endlessly striving for an unattainable level of approval. And here's the beautiful irony at the heart of it all. That's when real, lasting transformation happens. Not when you're desperately trying to be perfect, attempting to somehow earn God's love, but when you are resting securely in His love, allowing it to transform you from the inside out. Today, you took steps in that transformative journey, imperfect steps, stumbling steps, perhaps even steps that felt like you were moving backward at times, but steps nonetheless. And every single step toward God, no matter how small or faltering, delights Him. Every movement in His direction, no matter how seemingly insignificant, touches His heart. So, chosen one, let this profound truth settle deep into your soul, take root and flourish. God is delighted with you, not with some future, idealized version of you that you are striving to become, with you, right now, today, in the midst of your messy life, your struggles, your imperfections. He sees your heart, the genuine intentions that reside within you. He celebrates your progress, no matter how incremental. He delights in your faith, even when it wavers. And He's cheering you on, not criticizing you. He's proud of you, not disappointed in you. Today, you touched heaven, and God is truly, genuinely, deeply delighted with you.